Welcome to the debate. I want you to imagine walking into like a master clockmaker's workshop.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right. And when you look at the tables, there is this profound expectation of, mechanical inevitability. Every brass gear, every coiled spring is designed with absolute mathematical precision.
Mm-hmm.
If the main spring unlines, the secondary gear turns. It doesn't really have a choice. It doesn't, experience a psychological journey about turning. It simply turns because the physical structure of the mechanism demands it.
Sure, but imagine walking into a painter's studio right next door. You see a completely different kind of system, right? The artist has a specific palette of colors, reds, blues, ochres, and those colors are fixed realities. Red is red. However, the final canvas is absolutely not predetermined by the existence of the paint. Those colors are, well, they're potentials. They are archetypal forces that the artist has to consciously navigate, mix, and apply.
And that exact tension is what we're unpacking today. We are exploring this incredibly complex intersecting text that brings together ancient astrology, the tarot, and the Kabbalah.
It's a dense one.
Extremely. And the central question we're trying to answer is, are we the gears in a cosmic clock, or are we the painters of our own canvas? Do these celestial systems operate as a rigid deterministic blueprint that dictates specific physical outcomes? Or conversely, do they function as a symbolic framework of archetypal potentials that actually require human agency?
Right. And I'll be arguing that, looking at the material, this is an architecture centered entirely on psychological growth. It's really about spiritual development and the exercise of human free will.
And I am leaning heavily toward the clockwork model, because the sheer precision in this source material, especially the medical astrology, it feels chillingly exact. I'll be arguing that it outlines a literal system of cause and effect where planetary degrees dictate inescapable physical realities.
Well, let's start right there with the medical data, because I know that's what really hooked you.
Oh, absolutely. If you're listening to this and wondering, how do planets relate to biology? The text lays out an entire diagnostic system based on the radix.
The radix being the natal chart, right? The exact snapshot of the sky at the minute you were born.
Exactly. And the text doesn't treat this snapshot as a poem. It treats it like a circuit board. It relies on strict, ancient rules. For instance, it uses the concept of the high leg. And the high leg isn't some metaphor. It is mathematically calculated to be the literal, giver of life in a person's chart.
Mm-hmm.
And opposite to that is the Anoretta, the destroyer planet. The text goes even further, utilizing these highly specific tension angles like the quintessile.
And for those who might not know, a quintessile is a 165-degree separation between two planets.
Right, it's a minor aspect, but it acts like a pressure cooker. The text uses these mathematical markers to flag critical biological events. Let's look at the example they give of Arnold Schwarzenegger's heart surgery.
Oh, yeah.
The text shows that his open heart surgery on April 16, 1997 wasn't just a random health hiccup. It was triggered exactly when a progressive Uranus hit a specific constellation of the Sun, Pluto, and Saturn in his radix.
It's a compelling correlation, absolutely.
It goes way beyond correlation, though. Look at the case of Yul Brynner's lung cancer. The text maps it to a Saturn and Uranus opposition, squaring his precise, quote-unquote, lung degrees.
Right, because in astrology, Gemini rules the lungs.
Exactly. The twin constellation mirroring the twin organs of breath. The text identifies 4 to 10 degrees in Gemini as the specific coordinates for lung tissue. When the heavy planets hit that exact degree mathematically, his lungs failed. This level of physiological precision leaves no room for psychological reframing.
Well,
You don't journal your way out of a 16-degree hit to your lung coordinates. It is strict biological determinism.
I hear the finality in how you're reading that, but I come at it from a different way. I think we need to look at how these planets are actually operating in the text. Even within this highly specific medical section, the planets represent energetic principles, not literal physical diseases.
Wait, how can you say they aren't literal when it's predicting localized cellular mutation down to the exact degree? The text mentions a woman named Ricky who developed gallbladder cancer. Her illness was tied to the 21-degree mark in the sign of Virgo.
Yeah, Virgo rules the digestive tract.
And assimilation, and 21 degrees is mapped to the exact anatomical duct to the gallbladder. Her death was triggered when Saturn and Pluto hit those exact coordinates.
Right, because the math points to a location, but the planet describes the energetic failure. Let's break down how the text describes planetary influence on that 21-degree mark. Jupiter, for instance, is described as causing hypertrophy.
Meaning excessive growth of tissue.
Exactly, unbridled growth. And why does Jupiter cause that? Because Jupiter's fundamental archetypal nature is expansion without limits. It wants more. Conversely, Saturn causes shrinking or the decay of bodily forces because its fundamental nature is restriction and crystallization.
Okay, I follow the definitions.
Right. So these are energetic imbalances. They end up manifesting physically because the individual's overall energetic system is under severe tension. The disease is the physical symptom of an archetypal force. The system isn't saying Saturn equals cancer. It's saying Saturn equals a profound restriction of life force.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Because if a person cannot process that restrictive energy psychologically, it manifests in the dense matter of the body, right? That's your point?
Yes, exactly.
Think of it like a computer's operating system, though. When progressive Uranus hits that specific constellation in Schwarzenegger's chart, it's not a gentle suggestion to evaluate his life force. It is a line of code executing an absolute command on the hardware of his body. It is a biological event forced by a structural mechanism. You can't psychologically process your way out of a code execution.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. If the universe is running a strict machine code, why does the text literally give us error handling manuals for our behavior?
What do you mean?
Well, you're isolating the medical extreme while ignoring how the system operates on a daily behavioral level, which, this material spends vast amounts of time exploring. Look at how the text treats the Mars rules Aries ascendant. This completely undermines the idea of an unchangeable script.
Okay, I'm listening.
The text describes the Aries ascendant as fearless, independent, and highly impulsive. But then it explicitly warns that if this fiery energy is undirected, the individual's energy shoots aimlessly back and forth. They become frustrated and stubborn.
Sure, it profiles the personality.
It goes further than profiling. The 2026 Aries horoscope section advises the individual to consciously plan breaks in January to avoid restlessness and inner turmoil. I just can't buy the strict OS analogy. If this system were purely deterministic, offering advice to consciously alter behavior, to intentionally plan breaks, would be entirely futile. You don't advise a line of code to consciously slow down. The text is providing a weather report. It assumes you, the human being, have the agency to decide whether to grab an umbrella or walk out into the storm.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. I was actually staring at that exact section on the Aries advice, and I admit, on the surface, it sounds incredibly empowering, like a cosmic self-help book. But if we dig a layer deeper, that advice is an illusion of agency layered over a structurally bound reality.
How is telling someone to take a break an illusion?
Because of the ancient astronomical math underwriting it. The text explicitly roots this in Ptolemy's Tetrabiblos. Aries is not merely a psychological profile of a fiery personality. It is a structural reality in the sky. It is the domicile of Mars. It is the exact place where the sun is exalted at precisely 19 degrees.
And why 19 degrees?
Because 19 degrees of Aries mathematically represents the absolute peak momentum of the sun's return in the spring. It is maximum solar output. Conversely, Saturn, the planet of cold restriction, is in its fall at 21 degrees of Aries. It structurally cannot function there.
Right.
So when the text gives 2026 predictions dictating a specific financial bump for Aries in December, or career successes in November based on Jupiter and Saturn transits, it's structurally bound.
But it still advises action?
It's not advising action so much as describing the inevitable. The advice to consciously take a break in January is merely a description of what the planetary weather is already forcing the person to experience. The planets dictate that January will bring overwhelming energy, so the person will feel overwhelmed. The text isn't giving you an umbrella, it's just telling you that you are going to get wet.
Getting wet and deciding to build a boat are profoundly different experiences, though. If we want to understand the true intent of this system, we have to look at the esoteric synthesis in the text, the part it calls Das Weisse Dreigestirn, the wise triad of astrology, tarot, and the Kabbalistic Tree of Life.
Ah, yes, the really esoteric stuff.
Exactly. This is where the material reveals its true depth, and it is fundamentally a path of agency.
The Kabbalah section is dense. Break down how you see that proving agency.
So the text maps the minor arcana of the tarot directly to the 4 Kabbalistic worlds. Think of this as a blueprint for how a thought becomes a physical reality. It starts in Atziloth, which corresponds to the wands in tarot. This is the world of pure, fiery inspiration, a spark.
Okay.
Then consciousness moves to Bria, the swords, the realm of air, where you actually conceptualize the idea. Next is Jetsura, the cups, the realm of water and emotion, where the blueprint is formed. Finally, it drops into Asaya, the discs, the world of earth and physical action.
Right, so idea, concept, emotion, action.
Exactly. It's a top-down model of spiritual manifestation. It tracks the path of consciousness descending from pure energy into dense matter and evolving back up. The text maps the 22 major arcana of the tarot to the astrological signs to represent a hero's journey. The planets and signs aren't gears, they are stations of consciousness on the Tree of Life.
I see.
The journey starts with the naive fool, represented by Uranus, and achieves spiritual realization in the world, represented by Saturn.
See, I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because I think assigning those fixed coordinates to mystical concepts actually ruins your argument.
Wait, how so?
Because you are operationalizing a mystery. When you take the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, which is supposed to be this profound, fluid emanation of the divine, and you say the Empress card is hard-coded to Aries, or justice is inextricably locked to Libra, you strip away the fluidity.
I don't think it strips it.
The text systematically locks the 4 elements into the astrological decans. It categorizes them into cardinal, fixed, and mutable signs. It turns the mystical journey of the soul into a predictable cosmic spreadsheet.
A map isn't a spreadsheet, though.
But if the map forces you to arrive at a certain destination at a certain time, it is. You aren't experiencing a spontaneous spiritual awakening. You are simply hitting the astrological coordinate that mandates an awakening. It further proves a deterministic universe. The Kabbalah just becomes another schematic for the machine.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the actual language the text uses to describe these tarot cards and their astrological counterparts? It doesn't describe them as mechanical outputs. Take the Death card, associated with Scorpio.
Okay.
The text highlights this as a necessary die and become process, a profound internal letting go required to find one's soul guide. Or look at the Moon card, linked to Pisces.
The text calls that one a perilous night sea journey, right?
Yes, a perilous night sea journey where one must face their deepest fears. And the text explicitly states that on this journey, one can lose everything if they look back. It quotes the myth of Orpheus looking back at Eurydice.
Right.
This language is purely transformational. The system maps the terrain. It tells you that you are entering the dark forest of Pisces, but the individual must still choose to walk the path. They must choose not to look back like Orpheus. The system provides the map, but the human being must walk the territory.
But what if the map forces you into the dark forest against your will? If you enter that forest at the exact moment Saturn transits your 12th house, the choice of walking the territory is entirely manufactured. You are being pushed down the path by macrocosmic gravitational forces you cannot control.
Forces influence us, yeah, but they don't drive the car.
I disagree. And the text backs me up on a societal level too. Look at the macrocosmic predictions. The text notes that Pluto moving into Aquarius in 2023 initiates a new era of radical changes in technology and society. It literally says this happens, quote, whether we like it or not. Let's look at the concept of the lunar nodes mentioned for the 2023 Mars year.
The South Node in Libra and North Node in Aries.
Exactly. The text states the South Node in Libra forces a desire to adapt for harmony, while the North Node in Aries forces a demand for personal assertion. It frames this as a societal test that will provoke a correction. That is raw cause and effect. A planetary tension occurs in the sky, and millions of human beings react predictably down on Earth.
I would argue society reacts, yes, but the manner of the reaction is where agency lives. You brought up the Mars year of 2023. The text explicitly addresses the fear people have of Mars. Mars is the classical god of war associated with destruction. But the text clearly states that Mars also provides the fundamental courage and willpower to build the new.
Courage which is structurally dictated?
No, listen to the exact phrasing from the text. It says, "It is up to us to use the energy and power that Mars gives us productively and to take our happiness into our own hands." It literally says it is up to us. The energy of Mars is just the thrust. Whether we use that thrust to start a war or to overcome a personal obstacle is entirely the domain of free will. The stars impel, they do not compel.
I appreciate the optimism of that interpretation. Truly, it's a beautiful way to look at the universe. But when I look back at the empirical data presented, optimism seems beside the point. Let's return to Yul Brynner and the concept of disease manifestation, because there's a detail I left out that solidifies the clockwork.
Go ahead.
We talked about his lung cancer. When Brynner developed it, transit Uranus was in conjunction with transit Jupiter. They were in exact opposition to his critical lung degrees and squaring his radix Saturn.
Okay.
The text explains that Jupiter, when sitting with an evildoer planet in a tension aspect, actually multiplies the disaster. It expands the destruction. The geometry in the sky demanded a failure of the lungs, and the geometry was satisfied. Brynner's personal choices, even his heavy smoking, are framed as the inevitable physical mechanism by which the planetary mandate was fulfilled.
But wait, didn't those exact same planets align for Yul Brynner back in October of 1963?
Yes, they did.
So by your clockwork logic, if the math is absolute, the cancer should have manifested in 1963. But it didn't. He lived for decades after that. Why?
Well, the text accounts for that.
It accounts for it by introducing incredible nuance. The text argues that in 1963, Uranus was in the sign of Virgo. Virgo is an earth sign which gives Uranus a weak cosmic quality. The earth grounds the sudden lightning of Uranus. Furthermore, Jupiter was forming a protecting sextile. This proves that the system isn't a binary light switch. It is a probability matrix. It deals in energetic weights and measures.
A probability matrix is still a mathematical mechanism.
That it leaves room for the psychological root of the disease. The text mentions that many mainstream astrologers work with the asteroid Chiron to find that root. They believe that every physical ailment is based on an unresolved emotional conflict.
Right, Chiron, the wounded healer.
Yes. Now, the specific author of our medical text chose not to use Chiron because they wanted to avoid psychological speculation. But the very fact that this methodology exists and is cited in the source material proves the system is widely understood as deeply psychological.
I think the author of the medical text was incredibly smart to avoid Chiron, honestly. Relying on psychological speculation dilutes the empirical power of the system. If you want proof that this is a clock, look at the diurnal progression shown in the text for the exact time of death.
You mean the day-by-day planetary movements?
Yes, down to the minute. The chart shows the progressive Mercury forming an almost exact trine to the radix midheaven precisely at the time of the patient's passing. That is terrifying, beautiful precision. To reduce a system that can track a human life down to the minute of its end to a map of emotional potential feels like ignoring the stark reality of the evidence.
I don't believe acknowledging the psychological and spiritual dimensions reduces the system at all. I actually believe it elevates it. Think of the final piece of our source material, the connection between yoga and astrology.
Oh, the physical postures.
Right. The text describes this synthesis as a journey through the body. It posits that every zodiac sign represents a specific frequency in the cosmos, and that frequency corresponds to a specific body part. But here's the key.
Through asanas or physical yoga postures, we can consciously tap into those frequencies. Is it making you sick? You can actively perform a specific yoga pose to physically and spiritually integrate that Virgo energy. It is an interactive dialogue between the microcosm of the human and the macrocosm of the universe.
It is an interactive dialogue, sure, but when governed by immutable laws. As we draw our positions to a close, I keep returning to those laws. Throughout this discussion, I've maintained that the source material reveals a universe governed by strict, deterministic mechanisms.
Right.
Ancient Ptolemaic rules accurately flag surgeries and disease down to the day, leaves very little room for ambiguity. When the geometry of the radix is activated by a transit, the physical reality must conform. To me, it is a cosmic clockwork operating with or without our psychological consent.
And I maintain that viewing this system merely as a biological clockwork strips it of its profound spiritual utility. Yes, the math is precise, but by integrating the tarot's hero journey, the descent and ascent of consciousness along the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, and the constant psychological mandates, like the Aries ascendant's need to consciously balance impulse and empathy, the material demonstrates a system designed for active evolution. The planets provide the weather, and the archetypes provide the terrain, but it is human consciousness that must navigate the storm.
Despite our deep disagreement on the mechanics of free will versus fate, there is definitely a clear point of convergence between us.
Which is?
Both of our perspectives require us to acknowledge that the source material outlines an astonishingly intricate, interconnected universe. Whether you view those experiences as unavoidable physical realities dictated by a 165-degree quindecile, or as archetypal spiritual challenges mapping to the tarot, we both agree that macrocosmic planetary movements are inextricably linked to microcosmic human experiences.
Absolutely. The sheer depth of the synchronization between the sky above and the human life below is undeniable in this text. It's quite humbling, really.
It really is. And I think there is profound value in considering both the structural mathematical mechanics I've highlighted and the poetic archetypal potentials you've championed. It reminds us that there is always more to explore. You brought up the physical manifestation of astrology in yoga practices. That alone suggests an entire avenue of active bodily participation that bridges our two viewpoints. We've really only scratched the surface of how the stars might live within the muscles and breath.
It is a vast, ancient architecture. Looking at it through only one lens, whether purely literal or purely symbolic, simply doesn't do it justice.
We will leave the ultimate conclusion to you, our listeners. Are we the helpless gears turning in the grand cosmic clock, pushed by gravity and light? Or are we the artists, consciously mixing the archetypal colors of the planets to paint our own destinies? Think about the clockmaker's workshop and the painter's studio. Which room are we truly standing in?